So I thought I'd walk through my process of taking the output from the Wolverine Pro, which is a little bit weird, and making it work both in a aspect ratio and a frame rate that is going to be consistent with playback on, standard televisions and so forth. So we're looking for a 16 by 9 aspect. Of course, 8mm film is not, um, and Super 8 is a little bit wider, but it's still certainly not 16 by 9. So there will be some pillar boxing on the resulting image that we get here, but I'm just going to walk you through. I have these three movies over here that were recorded, and you'll notice that Adobe Premiere Pro reports them as 20 frames per second, which is really weird because 8mm film is recorded at 16 frames per second typically, and Super 8 film is recorded at 18 frames per second typically, but neither is recorded at 20 frames per second, so it's an odd choice, but a little idiosyncrasy that we got to deal with. So what we really need to do, because the films were transferred at this, I'm going to clear some of these old files here. Because these films, I think I just threw out a thing I wanted. Yeah, sorry. These I'm going to clear out, and we don't need this. And so, okay. So we've got our sequence here that we're going to use called, which is a standard, by the way, 23.976 frames per second, 1920 by 1080 sequence. So what you call HD at 24 frames per second. So in order to get these there, we got to remember that they were not shot in this frame rate. So we have to use Adobe Premiere Pro to interpret them at a different frame rate. And that's found under the Modify menu, as I just showed. So what you'll need to do is change the frame rate that's assumed to 16 frames. These were 8mm, not Super 8. So they were 16 frames per second. So we're going to interpret the films at a different frame rate. Because they were captured as progressive frames, it's totally fine to do this. So it's just going to make them a little longer, but playing at the right cadence. So we have them in numerical order. That's the way that the Wolverine Pro digitizes them. And I'm going to just drag them in as a group right here. And we just had a couple little breaks, but they'll be imperceptible when the video is played. So it's going to ask us to change the current settings to the 16 frames per second or keep existing settings. And we're going to keep them. We want this to be a 24 frames per second file. So what am I going to do here to get these to, let me see the whole timeline, to play at the right cadence? You'll see now they're playing at 24 frames per second. So you actually get the right cadence going on. I'm going to actually blow this up a little bit so that it's a little bit more visible. There we go. You can see nothing looks artificially sped up and nothing looks, like it's going in slow motion. We're like in regular real life speed here, and that's really what you're looking for, to see if the cadence of your film is going to be set to what is real time. Just play a little bit of that so you get some motion here. And here they go on the toboggan. And that looks pretty normal. So now that we've got that, unfortunately this film had some glitch on the camera gate. That is not from the scanning process, because if you go ahead in time, you'll see the scanner, it doesn't have it on the film. So we know that it was part of this section of the film, and then it went away, thankfully. So at least we got that. But you'll also notice that the film here is a little bit under the scan of our 1920 by 1080 window. So what we've actually got to do is scale these movies up just a little bit so that we're going to maximize the screen real estate here. And yes, we're scaling, but these are pretty soft to begin with. So you're really not going to see that much of a difference when we scale it up a little bit. So let's jump over here into our effects controls. We're just going to eyeball it, scaling with constrained proportions until black borders are gone. Now when we play it, you'll see we're pretty close to the edge of that frame down there. I might actually shift it a touch downward, and that should cover our little anomaly there at the bottom. And you'll see that we're not quite all the way to the edges. We've got a little bit of pillar boxing going on, but we're keeping a normal aspect ratio and frame rate. So all we need to do now is copy this clip. We're going to select all the other clips in the timeline. In my case, it's only these two, and we're going to paste attributes. And what I'm going to do here is say motion, because the motion key, all the adjustments I just made are now going to be applied identically to these other clips. And you'll see as we play these, and now we froze. There we go. So as I play these files, you'll see that we stay pretty well within the same bounds. And you can see that these are also playing at the right speed because we group selected them before and changed to interpret them to 16 frames per second. So what's happening here is Adobe Premiere Pro is reading the video frames in at that frame rate, and it's taking that frame rate and putting it and interpolating it into a 23.976 timeline. So when we export this, it's going to be 24 frames per second, but it will still look right because it's only playing it in at interpolated frames. So it does a really good job of this, and the end results are really, truly amazing. Now, one of the options that we can also do here, because this is black and white footage, and believe it or not, this is 1931, and it held together great on the scan in. But what we need to do is we actually need to get into the lumetri settings and actually shut off our saturation completely. So let's see if I can find that on my layout here. And I don't know if our lumetri window's open. Let's open that up. There it is. So we're going to come in here and we're looking for saturation. We're going to take saturation down to -0. And you'll notice here in our scopes, our lumetri scopes, let me reset that back up to 0, or 100 rather, and you'll see lots of color information in here, and that's really noise. And we don't really want noise. It was a black and white image. It was intended to be a black and white image that never had any color information in it. That color noise is from our scanning process. So we can actually just get rid of it completely. And it's true, well, it's true that these are 8-bit movies that are coming in. That doesn't matter because they're black and white. So really it's just shades of gray here is what we're talking about. You can check out your exposure and make any other adjustments that apply to your footage. So you can see it's clipping in some places. There's not an awful lot of overexposure going on. Well, there's some in here on his face. So it has a sort of a soft clip up here at the top of our IRE meter. So we might actually do well to pull that back a little bit. And so the way we do that is with a video limiter. And so I'm going to close our lumetri color here, and I'm going to go to our effects bin, which is up here, and I'm going to do a search for limiter. And I'm looking for video limiter. It's right here. You can see it's an accelerated effect. So if you're using an NVIDIA graphics card, it'll be real time. And if we click here and go to our effect controls, you'll see that our choices for the video limiter are shown here. And you can allow 100 IRE as the SMPTE range. So we're going to put it into that SMPTE range. And then another thing you can do is this compression before switch. And watch the top of our waveform here. When I pull this down, say 5%, you'll now see that you regain some highlight detail in the very top end of these brightest pixels. So we're getting just a little bit more detail and not clipping it out because we are compressing the video limiter a little bit, a few percent before it gets to that 100 IRE top range. And because we've set it at 100 IRE, we know that no signal is going to be of an illegal luminance value. So now, again, I'm going to select this clip that I made these changes and copy it. I'm going to select all the other clips in the timeline, and then I'm going to say paste attributes. And you'll see now that I have these choices under effects. We can also paste the motion. It'll just overwrite that motion that we did earlier. So I'm going to say OK. And now if you look here, there's no color information in these other clips. And also, let's find a real peaky part of the video. We are now compressing that. If I turn this off, you can see we're clipping. And if I turn it on, we recall some of those highlights back into detail. So if we play here, you can see it move along. It's pretty good for a 1931 film. Who knows the last time this thing was even played. It's a little overexposed scene, but I think it was an error on the part of the cinematographer, not the scanner or the metering on the camera. Most of it looked pretty good, though. Most of it looked like, whites were topping out around 80 IRE. Here's some more real bright stuff. The clothing on the kid against that stark, dark background. It's like he was in a sunbeam. Here's some bright stuff, too. Recalling some of those highlights. So once you're done, it's easy. You would just say File and Export and make your MP4. And that's all there is to it. You can even sort of preview what it's going to look like in the settings that you've adjusted over here. Media Encoder gives you a nice preview of that. We're going to change our scene to full HD. But there you go. It'll even play here. Pretty lightweight files coming out of the Wolverine Pro, honestly.